Welcome to the Retail Tech Podcast. My name is Darius Wasafi, and today I am speaking with Max Bennett, the co-founder and chief product officer of Bluecore and the founder of Alby. Hey, Max.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me on the podcast. Let's start with a brief bio on yourself and Alby and Bluecore and all that exciting work that you're doing.
Sure. So in 2013, me and two friends started Bluecore. It was back in the day before machine learning was cool. That was like the era of big data. And the general thesis was that automated marketing communications that were personalized, which Amazon was doing and most other brands and retailers were not doing, was going to be sort of the future of high performance owned marketing channels. So we built what, for the most part was a triggered messaging platform. So we would track what people do on websites, we would build an identity graph, and we automatically deploy personalized messaging. There was no machine learning in the beginning. But we quickly sort of realized that we were getting this incredible amount of data. And so we pivoted the business of Bluecore into fundamentally a machine learning platform where you could build predictive analytics and predict when customers were going to do things and trigger communications on the basis of that. So that was, spent about 8 years doing product at Bluecore. The company did very well. And then towards the tail end of that, I started getting an itch to do something new. So I took a year off, ended up writing a book actually on, which is a separate topic we can get into if you want, about the evolution of the human brain, this connection to AI. And towards the end of that, me and another friend of mine who I knew from way back in the day started Alby together. And Alby is an agent platform where we're using large language models to reimagine the way that brands build relationships with customers. And I'm sure we'll get into the details of that. And then 6 months ago, my old co-founder from Bluecore called me and they acquired Alby. So now I am back at Bluecore where it all began. And yeah, it's very exciting times because both products obviously serve the same customer base, retail. Alby's actually a little bit broader in terms of, it's not just really big retailers like Bluecore is focused on. It's even small mom and pop Shopify stores that we love working with. But yeah, the future is really exciting with all of these new agents and LLM technologies.
I am curious about your book with the title that you mentioned. So let's tell me a little bit more about that.
It's called A Brief History of Intelligence. And it started as this side project that I worked on for several years where I just became really interested in the brain. And so the origin of my interest is multifaceted, but the most straightforward sort of origin or place where it sort of flourished was something called Moravec's paradox, which is the fact that it's odd that there are certain things that computers are really, really good at, like counting numbers and doing basic arithmetic, that human brains are very bad at. But then there are things that human brains are really good about, like moving around in the world, common sense, that computers are very bad at. So why is there this paradox? Why are there things that computers are good at that humans are bad at and humans are good at that computers are bad at? Why is it not just one intelligence? Which is fundamentally a question about how does the human brain work. So I became, how is it different than AI systems? So I became very interested in this, became like a side project where I ended up publishing a few papers and reading a bunch of textbooks. And I ended up coming to this sort of realization that one way to try and make sense of this really crazy, complex thing of the human brain was to use evolution and to try and go back in time and trace the ordered sort of modifications or steps that led to the human brain today. Started just by looking for who had someone written that book because I would love to read that book. And because no one had written that book, I ended up taking notes that slowly cascaded into a few papers and then a book. So the core idea is that the human brain is very complicated as it stands today. Evolution is messy. The emergent systems are not always easy to understand because they're overlapping and there's redundant systems, so on and so forth. One way to understand one of these messy systems is to go back in time. The book starts 600 million years ago when the very first brain emerged. And one of our ancestors that became the ancestor of all, it's called bilaterians, which is the vast majority of animals' brains. And it traces the whole story of the lineage that became the human brains. And it traces five big fundamental breakthroughs that actually have some really cool parallels to breakthroughs in AI that led to the human brain. So that's sort of the core idea.
Definitely related to what's happening in AI, of course, and what we're trying to do, and especially the road to AGI. So the five major evolutionary cycles, do those relate to the five catastrophic events that the Earth has gone through?
They relate to them in the sense that the extinction events had big impacts on evolution, but they're not like there's not a one-to-one correspondence between them. But in the story of the human brain, of course, we chart through many of the big extinction events. The most famous one is, 67 million years ago, before an asteroid hit Earth, mammals were a very, very tiny niche in the ecosystem. I mean, the world was full of avians or dinosaurs. The ancestors of all modern mammals was like a little squirrel-like creature living underground or in trees. And if that asteroid had missed Earth, Earth would probably still look like that. There would be no dogs, there would be no bears, there'd be no humans, chimpanzees, any of that. We would still be living in an era of dinosaurs, most likely, given that dinosaurs had reigned for hundreds of million years. But because this pebble, compared to the scale of the galaxy, just landed on this other pebble, which was Earth, a completely new trajectory of life unfolded, where because dinosaurs died out, there was all of these new opportunities for the ancestral mammal to go down many different lineages, one of which would become humans. The breakthrough that happened in early mammals is really seems to be really, really important, which I get into. It's about mental simulation. So mammals show all the sign, even rats show all the signs of being able to imagine states of the world that are not the current ones. So that means imagining possible futures. That means re-rendering past events, also called episodic memory. And so this like amazing technological or intellectual breakthrough is hidden in the tiny little brain of these squirrel-like mammals. But because an asteroid hit Earth, they got to proliferate, and that breakthrough became bigger and more powerful and eventually led to human.
Let's talk about Alby and agentic commerce.
We're in one of those interesting times that we're in a hype cycle, but just because it's a hype cycle doesn't mean it's not going to be transformative. The mid 90s were a hype cycle of the internet. The internet did change the world, but also was a hype cycle. So like both things can be true. I think the same way, e-commerce didn't eliminate brick and mortar stores, which people were worried would happen. And we live in a hybrid world. I think it's very likely we're going to live in a world where sometimes agents shop on behalf of consumers and go to your website and purchase for them. Sometimes humans come to your website and purchase. Sometimes humans will come to your website and engage with an agent that represents your brand and purchase that agent. Sometimes consumers will come to a website and just browse a catalog and purchase, their own way. I'm skeptical that there's going to be one new user interface that's going to supplant all the other ones. I think what we're going to end up in is a further sort of multipolar world where there's now a new experience that we're going to have to learn to manage and deal with as a brand, begets a ton of new opportunities for us. I think there's a lot, similar to how the internet for a brand offered a way to build more direct relationships with consumers, offers more scale, in some cases more profitability if you don't have to rent a brick and mortar stores. I think there are similarly some really valuable economic benefits, sort of agentic interface. But no, I don't think it's going to fully supplant e-commerce websites or brick and mortar stores.
Looking at it from a different point of view might be helpful. The starting point in the search cycle for consumers is probably the most important and the most valuable.
Of the possible things we can sort of predict, I'll try to be transparent on what I have high conviction on and what I'm not sure about. What I have very high conviction on is that consumers are going to have these AI agents that they use on a very regular basis for advice and guidance when making decisions in their life. We're already seeing that happening. And in some ways, this is not even a prediction because this is already occurring. And it's just going to become more and more prevalent. And so when it comes to purchasing decisions, that really matters because it means that lots of people are going to go to ChatGPT. And if I'm buying a new, espresso maker, I'm going to ask what ChatGPT thinks the best espresso maker is for me because it now is referencing all of my chat history. It knows things about me. So I trust that the system is going to use information about me to make a recommendation. And so we're seeing that happen more and more. And of course, if you are a brand that builds espresso makers, you're going to care a lot about why is ChatGPT making one recommendation, if not another, and how do I, have a say in that? But yeah, I think there's very little doubt that more and more consumer decisions are going to be influenced by the agents that they talk to.
Experience of search and discovery is probably the most transformational part of this conversational commerce experience. How did you come up with the idea and how did you launch Alby?
The beginning of Alby was we knew that we started Alby before ChatGPT was released, before even OpenAI had released like the conversational framework underlying large language models. But what we did know is that these large language models were going to unlock these types of conversational interfaces in a way that wasn't possible before. I remember working on conversational interfaces in like 2016, and we ended up, I remember having a board conversation about whether we wanted to invest in this when Facebook started trying to get people to shop through Messenger and all these things. And we effectively concluded this technology wasn't there yet, which at that time ended up being right. And so the idea of Alby was that we felt like the technology was getting there, but we didn't know what the interface was. In other words, the user experience that shoppers would want. So our idea was we went to a bunch of brands that I had worked with at Bluecore and said, hey, for free, why don't we just create a design partnership and we'll just iterate with different types of experiences and see what your shoppers like. We'll survey them, we'll see what they engage with, we'll see if they end up purchasing on the basis of this, and let's test and learn together. And we really spent like 6 months iterating on different experiences, from like just a chat experience to we had all of these like full page takeovers. And the experience we found got the most initial traction is these like embedded widgets where we actually we use large language models to predict what the most likely questions about a given product are. And we make those sort of initial prompts like you see now on Rufus. This is before Amazon ended up launching that. And so you can click on those and then you enter a conversational journey. And we saw very, very high engagement rates on that, high customer satisfaction, high conversion rate impact. So it took us like 6 months of iterating to find that. And so once we discovered that, that's when we sort of launched the actual product. We put it on a Shopify store. We started getting traction. And now, Wayfair is a customer, and QVC and Evo and all these things. But from there, we started investing in a platform that was much more than just question answering about products. We now have a platform that is what we call an agent operating system, where you can launch an agent connected to different actions that it can do. You can give feedback to the agent to tune in on how to sell certain products. It automatically is learning a knowledge graph about your underlying products, how to sell them, what customers respond to, what they don't, all these guardrail systems for merchants to come in. So we're really investing for this future where our thesis is that brands and retailers are going to want to invest in an agent that represents them, that can talk to shoppers on their behalf. And we're building a platform to help people do that. So that's sort of the trajectory, but it started with just like, hey, let's experiment on websites to see what shoppers actually engage with.
Help me understand what a typical engagement with Alby.
If you're on Shopify, you just install the Shopify app. You can optionally use one of our integrations to connect to your reviews platform, so you can pull in reviews on products. And then in your Shopify template, you just choose to embed the widget, whether it's on the product page or the sort of chat experience, and then you're done. So we've had people install the app within 20 minutes and be up and running. Now there's a ton of more things you can do for people that have started going crazy and like really investing in an agent. So the theme here is the more data you give it, the smarter it is. So there are people that upload huge amounts of documents about their products, PDFs about their products, warranty information, assembly information. Some people are starting to upload like video transcripts. You can connect Alby to other internal systems so that we can, something that's soon going to be available is you can sort of update customer information as we learn about shoppers. We can look up order information. Like you can start connecting it to all your different systems. So this one agent can satisfy a huge portion of customer needs. So usually people start with like just the product page widget because it's so easy to launch. And then they start building on top of that by creating the actual chat experience, uploading more data, so on and so forth. But yeah, usually people begin just 20 minutes, get the data in and launch the product page widget.
For people who are not on Shopify.
If you're not on Shopify, then The additional thing is we need a product feed. So then you just have to set up a recurring product feed. It's the same product feed of Google Shopping. So you just take your Google Shopping feed and just connect it to Alby's SFTP, and then you're done.
And are there specific e-com platforms that you work with or you don't work with?
So today we're only have a direct integration with Shopify.
Other than that, as long as the product feed is standardized like Google's, it doesn't matter.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Are there specific product categories that work better?
Numbers we see are kind of crazy. Like on some of our client websites, up to like 25% of people who purchase engage with Alby at least once before making their choice. So we definitely see like high numbers of people engaging. We do see differences in categories. So more considered purchases get more engagement. So, skis, home goods, anything that requires assembly, higher ticket priced items, like those are definitely categories that you see deeper engagement because people have more questions, and usually the product pages are bigger and more complicated. And so this adds a lot of value by I can just type in my question directly instead of searching through these pages and reading PDFs, so on and so forth. In terms of the types of question, what's been so interesting is how diverse it is. It's if it was the case that people always had the same three questions, then you don't really need this agent. Just write an FAQ with those three questions. But what's interesting is that you see such a diversity of different types of questions people have about different types of products. And so what we've had a lot of people start doing is they're like data mining the questions that people are asking for SEO purposes. For some people are even using it for product development purposes. So they can say, for this category, what are the average types of questions that people ask before buying or before abandoning? And then we can use that to infer maybe what we need to stock or what people's challenges are with the product and why they're not buying it.
Let's talk about how Alby is actually built. So you said that you started before LLMs really became available in a way that OpenAI, the APIs were available. How did that, what is it that you're using right now? Do you have your own model? How do you do the training?
So we very much believe in building the platform in a way that is the model provider agnostic. And the reason we believe, so what that means is that Alby is a platform that sits on top of OpenAI, Anthropic, Azure, Gemini, and the clients can either say, Alby, you decide which model provider to use, or for sort of our more enterprise customers, they can actually use their own hosted models and so on and so forth. But the system is agnostic to the underlying model provider. And the reason that's really, really important is because the underlying models are improving so rapidly that you don't want to get locked into any one of these. So if, for example, we had trained our own internal LLM to do these types of things, then within 3 months, 4 months, it would be outdated. We would have to redo it because the techniques change, the scale changes, all that stuff. So most of our clients use OpenAI. We're having a bigger and bigger growing portion of our clients starting to use Gemini. But again, the system, you can sort of choose which LLM you want to use.
You probably know about Agent.ai that the co-founder of HubSpot is creating. Is that the same concept?
So they're the same concepts in the sense that we're both building tools to enable people to construct an agent. And the reason what an agent actually is an old term from many decades ago. All it means is an AI agent is a system that can take action in the world. So it has some feedback loop where it can take action and perceive the outcome, some outcome of its action. What makes these systems agentic is when they're connected to something real, whether it be a search database, whether they can execute purchases, they can update customer information, they can look up order statuses. These are actions they can take in the world. So there's so many different platforms now that are making it possible for people to create an agent, connect it to internal systems, and deploy it. We are laser focused on one specific application of agents, which is enabling e-commerce companies, so brands and retailers, to construct an agent to represent their brand. And so Agent AI is doing like agents for everything. There's agents for calendaring, there's agents for doing research on the internet about for finance, there's agents for, managing my email. It's gonna be agents all over the place. But we're focused on one very, very specific application where we think there's a lot of very deep specific needs. If a brand is going to be represented by an agent, there's a lot of guardrails that they need to put in. There's a lot of monitoring that needs to happen. It needs to there needs to be a feedback loop of customer data, so you can actually learn about customers over time. It needs to be performance oriented, so it needs to understand that the objective is actually selling things. It needs to be aware of catalog, and how the catalog relates to different things like reviews and all these documents and all that stuff. So there's just a lot of additional workflows that are needed for building an agent to represent a brand in the sort of shopping context. So that's what we're really focused on, but it's in the same theme as Agent AI because we're all building platforms to deploy agents.
Yeah, and the common part that most people are realizing is that part where you should not be dependent on one model. How do you A/B test which model performs better?
So we actually do this under the hood so we have infrastructure to A/B tests, and we've done this many times. We continue to do it, where we actually A/B test different models against each other. Depending on your scale as a brand or retailer, this can be really useful or a total waste of time. If you have a Shopify store that's doing, $1 million or less in annual revenue, I would not waste time A/B testing different models. I don't think one would have the scale to get a good read on it. It's going to be there's just so many better things to spend time doing. But if you're a huge retailer that you're doing, hundreds of millions plus GMV, that's when you start getting to the point that, a 1% shift in lifts can be really material on profit. And so that's a world where on the suite of things to A/B test, it's possible that A/B testing models will get is a worthwhile investment of time. Certain platforms support it. Our platform does. So you can sort of test different model providers against each other. We do a randomized controlled holdout. So a randomized percentage of customers will, without realizing it, be engaging with one model, and another group will be engaging with another, and we'll track differences in customer satisfaction, conversion rate, add to cart rate, all that stuff. So I think at a certain level of scale, it can be really useful. But I think for many folks, these models are not that different. They're built on very similar data sets. They're both at similar levels of scale. They're at similar pricing. It's not always worthwhile, like going deep on which it's sort of like asking, in some cases, it's not worth A/B testing using Google Cloud versus AWS. Like you make an informed decision and then you go all in on an infrastructure provider. I think for many folks, it's more like that. But at a certain level of scale, it starts becoming worthwhile to A/B test.
How does the cost structure of these models work out in your finance side?
We have two models for more entrepreneurial, startup, smaller scale clients. We abstract away all of the costs. So we pay the model providers, and we don't make our clients worry about that. For really large customers who want their own hosted model, we actually connect to their OpenAI or Gemini account. And so they're the ones managing the infrastructure because for privacy reasons, they want the model to be hosted themselves. So we're just a sort of workflow layer that sits on top of their own hosted model, in which case we're not paying the LLM cost. What's been really interesting is how LLM costs have gone from like very expensive to like actually not immaterial, but they're not a bottleneck as much for many applications. Because the costs have just declined so dramatically. I mean, the costs of a good model has gone down over 95% in just, I think, 18 months. I mean, it's wild how fast the costs are declining. It's obviously expensive if you keep upgrading to the state-of-the-art model, but for applications like this, there's a certain degree of sort of intelligence that one needs, beyond which is unnecessary for most use cases.
What's your favorite model right now?
Oh man, you're going to make me choose a favorite. We are the two most common models we use are Gemini's new suite, and then we use a lot of GPT-4o Mini. Those are two like very well-scaled models that we use on a regular basis. A good balance of cost-effective, but also performant and fast. It's another thing that's really key. There's sort of three metrics that matter in a consumer-facing application, especially on a website. There's the cost, so the dollar cost. There's the quality, but then there's also the latency. So, even if you have a relatively inexpensive, high quality response, but it takes 30 seconds, that's not acceptable to a live shopper.
So all these reasoning and research capabilities are really not of use. They're actually a negative for shopping.
Yeah, we haven't found reasoning models that necessary. We've done a lot of testing with the reasoning models. There's a few applications that we're looking at that, are in like kind of sort of research mode on our ends, where it might be the case that these reasoning models are useful. But these reasoning models are really like for more complex logic problems and types of things that are like not particularly necessary for shopping. And so what they end up doing is increasing latency a lot, cost a lot for a marginal, if any, improvement in quality. So that sort of equation doesn't end up working out, because the way these reasoning models work is they produce a lot of tokens before they respond to the user. So they think through things under the hood without you being able to see what they're doing before they render a response. So it makes them very high latency. And the logic behind that is you trade off latency for quality. But in shopping, what we've found is latency, I guess, is not so unsurprising given that famous study Amazon released of like every 0.3 seconds that the website takes longer to load, they lose $1 billion or whatever that stat was. We have similarly found that latency has a huge impact on shopper satisfaction and shopper conversion. So we tend to lean towards these really fast models.
So when a consumer goes to one of your customers' websites, they type in a prompt. The feedback that they get, if it is fast or there is latency, is that coming from the model, or is there also some interaction with your infrastructure that impacts that?
The majority of the latency comes from the underlying model inference, because our layer, there's not a lot of slowness, not because we're great, but because the software layer we have built doesn't require a lot of like inference time compute. So we're doing like very rapid database lookups to produce sort of an in-context prompt for an agent. And sometimes we circumvent the agent and we have a bunch of pre-computed things that we do. So there's a lot of like that, but they're all really fast databases. Our layer doesn't add a lot of latency. The biggest latency is the underlying agent inference. So yeah, but you're interacting with both. So like we intercept incoming messages. We do a bunch of lookups to construct in context sort of data. Then there's an inference step where LLMs, model provider is producing responses. We have a guardrail step where we're filtering that, decide whether we want to pass the user or we go back. And then, so there's sort of like an interaction between all these different layers.
Now, you mentioned you only work with e-commerce, so that means that you don't do any in-store applications or no?
Today, we're not doing any in-store. It's definitely a space we're looking at, but today we're not working with anyone on in-store use cases.
Let's talk about the data. And you mentioned a lot of customers are uploading a lot of interesting content. Where does this data actually sit? Does that sit in your system and then you use that as like a RAG to the model, or how do you actually interface, like interact with the data?
There's two main ways to get data into your agents if you're using the Alby agent system. One is for certain types of data, we will host it directly. So for reviews data, product data, verified Q&A data, we'll host that directly because there's a lot of different ways in which we can use that. And we're doing a lot of really fast database lookups and searches. So it's useful for it to just live directly within Alby to use to sort of inform the agents through things like RAG, as you're saying. You can also, very soon, we're going to add the ability to connect Alby to sort of an API or database where Alby can reference that when relevant to look up information at inference time. So in other words, like an example here would be, suppose you wanted to connect, you had an internal ordering system that had order status, and you wanted to make it so that Alby, the agent that you've launched, can look up the order status of a customer. You don't have to give us a huge data dump of orders. You can just add an action that to your Alby agent that allows the agent to ping the API to get the information about a given shopper. And so that's another way you can give Alby access to one's data without uploading all of the data into Alby all at once. So there's sort of two form factors. And what I would expect is that different use cases will fall into one or both of these. So I think certain things that are very real time, like order, is always going to be behind an action. There's a lot of benefit of uploading product catalogs to us because we build a lot of sort of enrichment on top of it. But we do have some clients that are exploring making it so that Alby actually uses their in-house built search system. So that would be like a sort of action that they would add. So yeah, there's many different ways. For some data, they upload it directly, and other data they add an action.
How do you address the challenge of hallucinations?
So hallucinations are actually really interesting because there are two categories of hallucinations. And this is something we actually end up talking a lot with customers about. One category of hallucinations are when the system is making something up that is false, and that's obviously bad. But there's another category of hallucinations where it's using its underlying knowledge that you have not explicitly given to it to answer information to the shopper. And some brands still don't want agents to do that, and some brands do. So, for example, suppose you go to Evo, who's one of our clients, and you ask a question about a ski that is not actually in their product catalog. So the question you're asking, the ski is in their product catalog, but the question you're asking, it's not in the metadata they've provided. If the agent still knows the correct answer and provides it because the underlying foundation model has been trained on the internet, is that good or bad? And so some brands say, I still don't want Alby to do that. And so there's some stuff you can do with an Alby to minimize the chance that it will ever say any information outside of the context data you give it. But the other brands that say, I just want the right answer to be provided to the client. So I'm willing to have the system sort of use its underlying, what's called parametric knowledge or knowledge from the foundation model to answer. Now, the more you let the model do that, the more risk there is that the model might be wrong, right? So you get an upside along with a trade-off, which is the more you're willing to let the model use its sort of inferred knowledge, sometimes it's going to hallucinate its knowledge. So there's a variety of different sort of parameters within Alby you can tune to move on the spectrum. You can never get hallucinations to zero, but you can get pretty close. Or there are people that are willing to let the system be a little more creative and reap the cost of some hallucinations for the benefit of like way more percentage of questions being able to be answered. The nice thing about this use case is people are not coming to Alby asking complex logic questions where these LLMs end up fumbling and producing like nonsensical answers. They're asking very practical questions about products and corporate policies and these types of things, which is where these LLMs perform very, very well. So we don't actually see hallucinations be like a material problem for brands. And there's a reason why Amazon has Rufus live on even products that I'm surprised. Like they have Rufus used on like supplements where, they're letting an LLM respond to shoppers. If I ask like, is this, does this have this allergen? The LLM will provide an answer and I can buy the product. And like, is Amazon taking that liability of the LLM being wrong? But it doesn't happen frequently enough that even Amazon is particularly concerned with that. So yeah, so hallucination is definitely a problem. It's important to be transparent with shoppers that like mistakes can be made. So, we require that our widget always has a transparency sort of disclaimer that you're engaging with AI, it can make mistakes. The nice thing about the rapid adoption of AI by consumers is consumers have all sort of been trained to know the trade-off of working with AI systems. So like now many consumers that are engaging with AI systems on websites are going to be familiar with engaging with systems like ChatGPT, in which case they're already aware of the benefits and the sort of limitations of AI. So that also is a halo effect that brands can take advantage of because they don't have to like train people to use AI. They're sort of coming pre-trained.
What's next for Alby?
We're working very hard right now on launching this sort of flexible agents operating system where you're going to be able to connect Alby to an arbitrary number of actions. You're going to be able to build playbooks, so very complex sort of workflows you can embed within Alby to be able to solve complex customer problems. There's a whole suite of new integrations we're about to release. There's a feature that I'm very excited about that we hope to have in the next month or two around contexts, where we're going to actually use what people do on the website to inform the agent's responses. So it can automatically customize what it recommends based on what's in your cart, based on what you've searched for already. That'll all be native. There's something we're calling Product Finder, where the system is going to naturally do like deep research, quote unquote, on the catalog to figure out what are the right questions to ask a shopper to guide them towards a product they're most likely to buy. We've seen some really, really cool initial results on that. Um, so those are just some examples of the things that we're hoping to release in the next month or two.
What's your team makeup built of? Is it mostly engineers or?
We are very engineer heavy, yes. So most of the people working on the Alby sort of product line are engineers. There's a few product people and a few marketing sort of customer success people, but like most of us are engineers. Yeah.
And they are probably 10x more effective than they were 6 months ago.
We have a big initiative to get people to use these AI systems. So yeah, there's a lot of intrepid AI users on the engineering team for sure.
Thank you so much, Max. This is very exciting. I'm happy to see yet another very innovative application of agentic conversational style to websites and look forward to hear more about your upcoming releases.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.